Released to the public in 1947, The Plague is frequently celebrated as the crowning achievement of Albert Camus' literary career. This narrative chronicles a devastating outbreak within the coastal Algerian municipality of Oran, a crisis heralded by the grim discovery of thousands of deceased rats littering the urban landscape. Throughout the narrative, the author's signature absurdist philosophy serves as a profound foundation, emphasizing the sheer inability of human beings to control their ultimate fates within an utterly apathetic universe. Within the text, you will discover a fascinating reference to a youthful corporate worker who took the life of an Arab man along a shoreline. Naturally, this detail serves as a direct nod to Meursault's infamous crime in The Stranger, weaving that prior narrative into the destructive wake of the current pestilence. The author's personal encounters with sickness, banishment, and relational distance heavily inform his work, providing an essential, grounded contrast to the broader allegorical elements. Consequently, his portrayal of the epidemic and the agonizing sting of isolation resonates with extraordinary emotional clarity. To ensure the utmost objectivity in the unfolding historical account, the manuscript opens from the perspective of an anonymous storyteller who only discloses his true identity as the tale concludes. At the center of this ordeal stands Dr. Rieux, a steadfast, secular humanist who continually clashes with dismissive government officials while demanding rigorous sanitary protocols to combat the escalating health crisis. Even as his tireless crusade against the contagion seems to yield practically zero results, the physician relentlessly persists in his medical duties. The grim reality first manifests when the doctor emerges from a medical procedure, only to stumble upon a lifeless rodent resting on the ground. Over the subsequent days, multiplying hordes of these creatures emerge into public spaces only to perish, an anomaly initially dismissed by both the physician and a building manager who suspects a juvenile practical joke. However, as the grotesque spectacle of dying vermin escalates exponentially, a pervasive anxiety grips the local populace, prompting them to severely doubt the municipal administration's competence. Ultimately, that very building manager becomes the initial human casualty of the outbreak, foreshadowing a wave of identical fatalities that swiftly follows. You are soon introduced to Jean Theroux, a character who diligently maintains extensive journals documenting his first-hand experiences of these terrifying events. His meticulously kept ledgers capture the mundane realities of the locale, alongside the gradual intrusion of the baffling sickness. Through the anonymous narrator's reflections, we learn that prior to the disaster, the municipality was defined by crushing monotony, characterized solely by labor, cinematic entertainment, coffee shops, and hollow materialism. Caught in these stifling habits, the residents squander their limited mortal span, trapped in an existence devoid of profound significance or genuine fulfillment. As the catastrophe officially engulfs the population, the collective reaction is dangerously sluggish, exacerbated by an administration that prefers a passive observational stance over issuing necessary public warnings. Driven by the terrifying calculation that half the inhabitants could perish, Dr. Rieux aggressively advocates for immediate interventions and the swift procurement of a curative serum. He insists that the community must operate under the assumption that they are battling the bubonic plague, prioritizing mass survival above all political comforts. This institutional hesitation powerfully illustrates the profound apathy and willful ignorance woven into the social fabric, acting as the narrative's central metaphorical contagion. Only after the situation deteriorates completely, trapping the populace inside a draconian quarantine, do they comprehend their previous failure to cherish what genuinely mattered, raising profound doubts about the authenticity of their supposed pre-crisis freedom. The physician observes a tragic paradox regarding human nature. Despite conflicts and pandemics being permanent fixtures of history, societies perpetually react with utter shock when tragedy inevitably strikes them. Reflecting upon gruesome historical records of past pestilences, he grimly fortifies his mind for the harrowing ordeal that lies ahead. The second segment of the narrative plunges you into the profound emotional desolation experienced by the quarantined population. With postal communications completely severed to prevent global contamination, countless individuals suffer agonizing separations from their families, gradually surrendering to their indefinite captivity. As memories spark intense sorrow and the current reality breeds frustrated impotence, any lingering optimism regarding the future slowly evaporates. These trapped individuals wander through their days like directionless inmates, yet they stubbornly maintain an intense narcissistic fixation on their own individual miseries. Coping mechanisms vary wildly. For instance, one patient occupies his isolated hours by meticulously transferring peas between containers, a thoroughly absurd and futile method of killing time. Conversely, an aging municipal worker named Joseph Grand, burdened with the daily tabulation of the deceased, approaches his existence with an entirely different obsession. He exhausts his days agonizing over a single sentence for a prospective novel, endlessly revising it in a paralyzing quest for linguistic perfection. Simultaneously, he mourns the loss of a spouse he neglected due to relentless labor, eternally failing to draft an explanatory letter to her, thereby illustrating how chasing an impossible standard ultimately results in complete paralysis. The author, however, presents a third philosophical path, fully accepting the inherent futility of achieving perfection, yet valiantly fighting the battle regardless. Dr. Rieux embodies this ethos as he endlessly manages overflowing infirmary wards, regularly enduring the heartbreak of forcibly separating infected individuals from their grieving relatives. To survive this grueling routine, he must consciously detach his emotions from the surrounding horrors, suppressing his empathy to conserve the stamina required to battle the disease. Crucially, this emotional armor should not be mistaken for apathy, as true indifference would manifest as either passive denial or a total refusal to mitigate the surrounding agony. Strangely, the sole resident who experiences genuine comfort during the catastrophe is Cottard, a secretive criminal previously consumed by the daily terror of apprehension. Because the local law enforcement abruptly shifts its focus entirely to the health emergency, he is granted an unexpected reprieve from judicial pursuit. His newfound euphoria stems largely from the realization that the entire community now shares his once private state of perpetual dread, transforming his previous isolation into a bizarre form of liberation. Meanwhile, amid this psychological chaos, a Jesuit cleric named Father Paneloux addresses his terrified parishioners, forcefully preaching that the deadly contagion is a divine retribution unleashed upon them for their moral transgressions. As you delve into the narrative, you discover that the author perceives a deeper truth hidden behind the epidemic, extending far beyond a simple communal tragedy. The profound irony here lies in the fact that mortality remains an inescapable reality of the human condition. Prior to the outbreak, the townspeople were essentially just biding their time until the inevitable, losing themselves in passive distractions while remaining completely oblivious to their own certain demise. Through the eyes of Dr. Rieux, you witness countless individuals confronting their approaching end, watching as patients vehemently reject their mortality, even with their final breaths. These dying souls grasp the sheer pointlessness of their struggle, yet they continue to express fierce defiance. This perfectly illustrates the absurd paradox of harboring a desperate yearning for life while being universally sentenced to death. Ultimately, Camus posits that the only rational response you can offer to this predicament is active rebellion, which fundamentally translates to a relentless revolt against mortality itself. When questioned about his core motivation, Dr. Rieux clarifies his stance with a profound observation, noting that the entire ordeal has nothing to do with being a hero, but rather revolves around simple decency. He admits it might sound absurd, but he believes the only genuine weapon against the epidemic is this very decency, prompting an unusually serious Rambert to question what that actually entails. Rieux humbly replies that while he cannot define the concept universally, for him personally, it simply means diligently performing his designated job. As you transition into Part 3, you observe the citizens of Oran finally grasping the epidemic as a truly shared catastrophe. This disease operates without any regard for logic or morality, indiscriminately claiming victims across every single layer of the social ladder. Consequently, mortality always emerges as a communal disaster, simply because it represents the shared destiny of all humankind. Eventually, the sheer volume of casualties overwhelms the local graveyards, forcing the authorities to resort to mass cremations, and the deceased are ultimately discarded in the exact same ruthless manner that the rats had been eliminated just months prior. Moving into Part 4, you witness the desperate locals seeking refuge in theatrical performances, highlighting their profound inability to acknowledge the genuine peril surrounding them. Nevertheless, this temporary escape abruptly forces them to face the rejection of their own mortality, culminating in a panicked stampede toward the exits as the illusion shatters. They constantly obsess over their post-epidemic plans, completely squandering their present lives rather than maintaining their composure. As the narrative notes, they remain blind to their own advantages, ultimately suffering because they refuse to simply surrender to the moment. Camus implies that you can shatter the profound isolation bred by this terror, not by giving up, but exclusively by actively combating the disease. During Father Paneloux's subsequent sermon, you will notice a starkly diminished congregation sitting in the pews. He argues that the inexplicable suffering of an innocent child serves as divine leverage, essentially forcing a Christian into a corner where they must either embrace total faith or commit to absolute denial, challenging his audience to see who would possess the audacity to reject it all. The priest passes away shortly after, though the exact cause remains deeply ambiguous, a fitting symbol reflecting the profoundly uncertain nature of his entire philosophy regarding human existence. Camus firmly maintains that pushing back against the ruthless march of the contagion remains an honorable and deeply significant endeavor, even if you are ultimately marching toward guaranteed failure. You are reminded that we must incessantly battle the metaphorical illness festering within our own minds, as every single one of us carries this contamination to some degree. The text emphasizes that absolutely nobody on earth is perfectly safe. Therefore, you must maintain unwavering vigilance over your own actions to prevent even a brief lapse in attention, lest you carelessly exhale into another's face and pass on the disease. As you reach Part 5, the fatality rate gradually begins to drop, yet the heavily traumatized populace remains extremely reluctant to embrace optimism after enduring such a protracted period of isolation. At this juncture, the previously anonymous narrator steps forward as Dr. Rieux, explaining that he strictly confined his account to observable actions and spoken words to ensure a rigorously impartial historical record. Following a solemn memorial for the victims, the survivors seamlessly resume their previous routines and behaviors, acting exactly as if the trauma had never occurred. However, the closing warning reminds you that the pathogen never truly perishes. It simply slumbers for decades within household objects, waiting patiently for the inevitable moment when, for the enlightenment or devastation of humanity, it will once again summon its rats and dispatch them into a blissfully ignorant city. The profound apathy of the Lovecraftian universe, coupled with the sheer triviality of humanity within its vastness, can easily saturate you with a crushing sense of dread. Yet, one could convincingly assert that traditional theological frameworks actually diminish our cosmic standing even further. When measured against an absolutely boundless, all-knowing, and ever-present divine entity, our mortal, strictly bound existence becomes unimaginably minuscule. Naturally, submitting to a supreme paternal overseer offers profound psychological comfort, just as the belief that you are fashioned in a divine likeness grants the reassuring illusion of sharing in cosmic authority. Nevertheless, we must question whether the bleakness envisioned by Lovecraft is genuinely so demoralizing. Consider a godless reality populated merely by various other mortal civilizations. Even if these extraterrestrial entities possess superior wisdom or bizarre physical forms, their fundamentally restricted nature makes them logically akin to humanity, rendering them far less terrifying than the concept of an inescapable, supreme creator. In truth, the absolute void of universal moral mandates secures our total self-reliance, granting you the unhindered liberty to forge your own subjective significance without the constraints of divine decrees. Rather than despair, this existential blank slate provides a foundation for radical optimism and exhilarating liberation, enabling us to architect our own purpose and finally satisfying the profound human yearning for meaning within an inherently indifferent reality.